Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to have a conversation with Sheimah and I. Sheimah is one of the awardees for the Sheikh Saoud Al Thani Award for the Project Awards, and we're very excited today to talk about your work, your process, get people to know more about what you do, especially because unfortunately all the exhibitions, along with the lockdown, all the museums are currently closed, so we're not able to show your amazing work to the public. So we're hoping that they can get a glimpse of why we chose you and your amazing work through this.
Thank you, Maryam. It's great to be part of, like a very, I'm hoping what will be a new community in Doha. And it's an honor to also have, accepted the award from Sheikh Saoud Al Thani. I really am looking forward to the next editions and see how it develops. And, hopefully for us to continue being part of like the entity.
Yeah, exactly. It's very exciting to have Tasweer, it's our first time, first time having the festival, but we're hoping that it grows year after year, and it's on every 2 years, but the award is on every year. And
okay.
So the award is annual, and it's open for anyone to apply, which is great. So
that's nice.
Yeah. And we'd love to see how your projects also, transform along in the years to come as well, and what turns into.
Likewise.
Yeah. So I'd like to know a little bit more about your work and how your photographic practice went from, I don't know how you started taking photos, but from when I've started following your work and met you, it's mainly been about kind of tracing your family's heritage and like the roots and the paths that they've taken to get to where they are today. So I'd love to hear more about what moved you to start documenting this and to start looking into it.
Yeah, so my journey with photography actually started many years ago. And it was very sporadic in how I picked it up. It started with me, as a 15-year-old, and my father signing me up to a photography class over the summer. And he was just like, yo, so you're going to start photography classes in a few days. And I thought, what do you mean? All I have to do is just click and, one second, someone left the door open. Yeah, and he was like, no, photography is so much more than just clicking. You need to know how to, you need to understand light and, what angles you need to take it from. You need to understand how cameras work and whatnot. So I did the basics back at that time. And, with the advent of social media and Instagram and in a pre-COVID world where we would be able to travel, I was really attracted to capturing moments from my travel, especially of the street life, city life, and just kind of, I think the reason I enjoyed photography in that sense is because it allowed me to get closer to people whom I would never just walk up to say hi's. And so the camera was the perfect tool to connect me with the other person and just get to know more about their way of life, their style, how they live. And it just, for a person who is as shy as I am when it comes to meeting people publicly, that's where the camera came in, and I kind of just went along with that. And then slowly, I started taking photography into a more long form structure, where I wouldn't just go to shoot for the sake of shooting single photos. I I learned to start thinking of, image making in terms of trying to tell like a coherent and cohesive story. And so I, through that process also learned that it's a lot of research. It's a lot of like understanding how to approach topics in a way that gives respect and agency to the people that you're collaborating with. And it really started with like, okay, if this is something I'm gonna have to do with other people, if I want to tell their story, like I need to first be able to tell mine. And this is where like, when I start talking about like our migration and our story of, moving from one country to the next over the span of 60 years, that's when I felt like I knew that I had so much to say, or I was feeling way too many things that I just didn't know how to put in words. And again, like photography was the way in which like I could put all of that together. Of course, like I received a lot of encouragement from different mentors that I've worked with in the past, and different courses that I've taken with, GPP, and having also won a grant from AFAQ back in 2019. It's all these small entities and organizations that help propel you, that have led me to where I am today. And I'm, really, really happy that finally there's something in Doha that also, continues the support with photographers, and not just from the financial sense, but in terms of like, bringing you closer to people that can help you, bringing you closer to people that can critique your work and just can be your support system. So that's how my journey started. I think I gave you way too long of an answer for a short question.
No, I think it's great to hear that. And we were speaking right before we started the call about how, when your father told you like you're going to take a photography class, right now we were speaking about how at this time our children are going to be saying, we're going to start working with augmented reality and things like that, and it's going to be second nature, and you no longer imagine it being a class. You're like, this is something that's part of my everyday.
Yeah.
And that's very, very exciting to see. We're moving so fast into new ways of becoming visual storytellers that the concept of photography is like constantly expanding.
Yeah.
In many ways, so it's very difficult to define it in that way. That's like, I can just.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's evolving as much as, because you hear people, for example, asking very valid questions like, do you think photography is dead, or do you think the still image is dead? Because there's this constant evolvement of like moving towards moving images or VR, AR, and like bringing in different techniques to liven up a photo. And I mean, I don't think I can agree with the fact that photography is dead in that sense, because as a minimum, it is where you have to start. And so that's where you can build on. So it's like the foundation that you have to first work with in order to enhance it even further.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd love to for you first to speak a bit about your archival style of image making, especially with the project that you did As If We Never Came. And just to maybe show us a few of the images, since people aren't able to see it yet in the exhibition, and just talk through, how you even potentially got to the space where you get this feeling that you're looking at an image, in your family album, and what you were trying to explore with that.
Yeah, so As If We Never Came is, I'm gonna start the presentation. I think. I think people can already see. Like, there isn't a way for us to confirm whether people can see the images or not, but I believe that they can. So, As If We Never Came was a product of my time at AFAQ. where, as I said, was mentored by a wonderful photographer called ثاني. And, you know, again, like this is also where I learned how we could bring in different aspects from the past and texts and writing and all of the stuff that makes a photograph or a project like come together a lot more vividly. So with this specific project in mind, I wanted to explore and bring people closer to the situation of how like a lot of Yemenis like myself are of mixed race, are bilingual or trilingual people. I mean, I'm a trilingual person, and like, for example, whenever, you know, someone asks me like, oh, how do you speak Swahili, or where does Kenya come into the mix? And, you know, I kind of have to like explain the whole story from the very beginning of how, like, you know, with Yemen specifically over the last 100 years, if not even more, there's been, you know, a huge like exodus of people leaving towards East Africa, to India, to Indonesia, and even Western countries like Britain and the US to trade and go for work. You know, colonialism had a big part in expanding that movement. And so, as you can see from the map here, for example, this is Yemen, and I kind of just sketched out our trajectory of movement, starting from my grandfather, who left all the way to Tanzania. And then in the 1960s, there was a war that broke out to overthrow the Arabs, you know, out of the country. And so they went back to Yemen, and that was like a very, very deadly time. And then my grandfather passed away, Allah yarhamah, at the time, shortly after that. So my father wanted to look for, you know, different means to make a living, moved to Tanzania, and then moved to Kenya, and then he went all the way to the UAE, where, you know, that's where he started the family, and that's where I grew up, and my sisters. And then 26 years later, I moved to Doha. And like, I'm not trying to bore you with all the details, but for me, like, having to look back at like why I ended up in Doha, it's not because like I had a job opportunity. It's because my father came to the UAE, and before that he was somewhere else, and then before that his grandfather was somewhere else. And so it's this tracing of, you know, how long are we going to have to continue moving, or why have we been moving this whole time? And then it just goes down to, you know, talking about the freedom of movement and politics between different countries. And, you know, it's just like, this is the situation that a lot of us, you know, have to deal with. And I kind of wanted to start putting that into words, into feelings, into images. And so, you know, basically this is the project that came out of that. It's me kind of narrating, it wasn't just about narrating the project itself, but it was about solidifying and acknowledging, like, this has been our past and this is why we are here today. It wasn't like nothing happens by chance. And to put that into, you know, a body of work, really starts to help you, you know, think forward, or like think for the future. So I'm gonna like quickly go through some of the images here, but like, for example, this image here, which is my father's suitcase, it's actually the image that inspired the entire project. And it was a photo that my sister sent to the family WhatsApp group a couple of years ago. And she was like, Sheimah, do you know what this suitcase is? And I was like, yeah, I know. It's like some suitcase we have in the storage room. And she's like, okay, yeah, but it is the suitcase that my father came to the UAE with. And it was just during that time, literally, quite literally, like, I saw his life flash before my eyes, like him being this 20-something-year-old man coming to the UAE with nothing but a suitcase and hopes and dreams to build something. And, you know, here we are decades later. I think that's when I started seeing, that's when I understood that my father was an immigrant. And so are we. Like, I think it's just something that we inherited and never really thought of, you know, as opposed to like me only thinking of my father as like a father figure. Yeah, it was a bit surreal. So here are some images between, it's like a correspondence between my parents when they were engaged. And it's basically my mom in the 80s telling my dad to buy her some lace material because she wants to make like bedspreads and curtains. And then towards the end, I found something that was really cute of her saying, also enclosed, find one of my photos, an old one, but I hope it will do. And it was just so cute how like they would, you know, speak in postcards and letters. And now we just have WhatsApp and everything is so fast paced. Like, you know, there isn't that anticipation of waiting for something or your love to speak to you, or, you know. So yeah, and like just behind the picture, she had this typed, you know, for your eyes only. But of course, like, I'm not gonna show you the picture itself. I have to play around with it and respect her decision that it was obviously like a private moment. But yeah, like this is where, like, you know, even these restrictions of not being able to bring in my mom fully into the project, but still finding a way to include her. So yeah, like I played with like the concept of like the lace that she was asking for. Wait, I think I have to move on to the next slide. 1 second. I wish that there was a way to get an indication from
yeah, they can see it. They can see it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's like a continuation of the conversation that they were having. And obviously my dad goes to the souk, as you can see from the picture here, and then behind it, you know, he writes like, how about such materials, Abu Dhabi? But yeah, it was really, really sweet. And you know, it speaks to the whole again, topic of you know, relationships within migration and movement. And then, of course, like a lot of the research that I was doing for this project itself, you know, made me want to visualize how, you know, احنا as like Yemeni East Africans, like there's a specific way in which we dress and speak that may not necessarily come out to other people when we're in public, because it feels like I would say like a private code, you know, between us and ourselves. And for example, here, this is an image of, I mean, it's my sister, but she's wearing a 2-piece fabric that we call leso, which is very East African. And like, even if you go to Yemen nowadays, like for Hadramaut, like women still wear this to this day. And it's, you know, part of the traditions that we've like not just inherited, but came back to Yemen and embedded it into our own culture as well. And so this one time I went to, many years ago, I think it was like over 12 years ago, I went to a lecture that was given by this American, if I'm not mistaken, he was American historian who lived a very long time in Yemen. And he specialized in Hadrami studies. And he was saying that his findings have led him to come to the conclusion that in order for someone to be pure Hadrami, they have to be of a mixed identity. And this stuck with me like to this day, because it is so true. Like احنا كحضارم, like we've moved around so much and integrated into different societies, and, you know, got married to women of different cultures, that like we all have something else in addition to the fact that we're Hadrami in our blood. And obviously, like, these are the small tips that I wanted to share, you know, with people, because I mean, it's just something that you know, we should celebrate more and be more open to sharing these informations. I didn't want to go over every picture by picture.
Well, it's so lovely to hear you speak of it. Maybe it's because I've interacted with these images so many times.
Yeah.
Personal narrative, you know?
Yeah. Actually, I'm curious about how you perceived, you know, these images. I mean, if you were able to like spend time on them, because I know that, you know, like having the photographer take you through the project is like you get a completely fresh perspective. But I also always like to, you know, interact with people who, and understand like how they've perceived, you know, these different bodies of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the like super intimate nature of these images. Did you say that this was your brother?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, like I had no idea, you know. It doesn't say in the image what that it is.
Yeah.
And so I used to just laugh at this so much. Like, so much. Like he's gonna be driving his Bugatti. Yes, like this is the kind of, you know, manifestation that we need. I had no idea, you know, and I realize now that it's like deeply, deeply personal, and how you bring these stories, you know, because I was saying earlier, a lot of the people that have submitted have a lot of research, like deep research into forms of like the diaspora or migration one way or another, and it's really interesting to see that actually the point of departure is very different between each one, you know, like where yours is extremely personal, but you can still feel the stories about, you know, how you're going back to visit. Your father's suitcase was the kind of the image that we're using for a lot of the content for the exhibition. So that was the most that I kind of related to, but also I couldn't relate because I come from a background that is, you know, my background is rooted in where I am, even though I remember doing research, like some of my first projects were always into displacement and exile and that feeling of not belonging. And I think you mentioned that in the video that we'll show later, is that it's funny that I grew up home and I never left home, but I still have that feeling of displacement that I think a lot of us feel, because it could be because of like these very, you know, rapid changes that we go through in life, or, you know, everything's changing in front of us. So how does it, where do you feel home? And I think that notion of home is something that you interpret really well in the images that you share.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like the picture with my brother, and it's just to give you a tiny bit of context. This excerpt here was actually something that I found from a diary that I had given to him almost 7 years ago. And so he was probably 13 when he wrote this. And I was basically trying to encourage him to have this practice of like writing in his diary. And this book, I forgot what it was called, but it's amazing because it has these prompt questions that, you know, asks you a question like this. And, you know, he just very naively responded with, you know, in 5 years' time, I will be driving my car, Bugatti, in the streets of Yemen. And we're already 7 years after he wrote this. And so here, obviously, in this image, he's a man now, mashallah alayh. But, you know, it's something about also wanting to capture his intentions that obviously kind of never really came true. But it's funny how, like, he grew up wanting to always go to Yemen. And actually, from all of my siblings, he's the only one who goes back every summer. And so he's very much embedded into that, like, you know, Yemeni lifestyle that we, as his female siblings, aren't necessarily, like, we didn't grow up the same way that he did in that sense. And so there's a huge detachment towards how I know myself as a Yemeni and how he knows himself as a Yemeni. But yeah, and just to conclude this image, I kind of wanted to bring the suitcase back in a metaphorical sense of like having to talk about, you know, where next are we, would we have to move if we ever come to that point. But this was the first family photo that we ever took together in a studio. And it came after years of me begging my family, like, yalla, let's go to a studio, yalla, let's go to a studio. And when we did, like, I made sure to go to one of these, like, al-adas al-dhahabiyya style, with the background that just feels so nostalgic. And it was very important for me to, like, bring in the suitcase to continue this metaphor of you know, I wouldn't say displacement, but it's you know, movement and migration in the ways that we know it as people who keep moving. You know, obviously, like when we talk about immigration nowadays, it's very different because we have a lot of people escaping war and not knowing how to get out. And so, you know, in that sense, our experience is very different. And, you know, I still wanted to share the validity of having to still feel lost while not necessarily having gone through war personally. So yeah, this concludes this part of the project. I hope that, you know, it'll bring people slightly closer to the story of Yemenis in diaspora, although I'm not saying that this is a representation of it.
Yeah. So from that, you know, from this departure point of looking into your family, where do you see yourself kind of exploring as, you know, because I would phrase, like, if I hadn't met you, I would phrase your work as like more documentary style photography, but then you add so much personal narrative, but also I can never tell if it's real or not, you know, in that way. It's really odd to say, but you can't tell what's yours and what's not, and what's like, it feels a bit like storytelling, where it is documentary style, but it also feels not fictional, but just like you're in this, immersed in this experience that you're not really, you can't tell, you know. It's like your brother, like I wouldn't have been able to tell, you know. You allow the viewer to make their own conclusions about your images, but also connect to people that are on the move, and also just very human elements, instead of these more images of documentary photography, like you said. So like from there, where do you think that, you know, where will you go beyond that, you know, beyond that storytelling? Do you think you've said enough of your story, or are you still exploring that in different ways?
Oh, I think, you know, when you work on long-term projects, and especially this one, like it's, you know, it wasn't necessarily like actively many years in the making. It just so happened that it ended up coming together when I decided to make something out of it, because I had all this archive and knowledge and footage and research. And like, for example, I was just telling you before the session started, like 2 weeks ago, we shifted to a new apartment. And yesterday my father was going through like the different, you know, boxes that we now have to like start sorting into different areas and store them. And he saw a document of it's his mom, Allah yarhamha, my grandmother. It's like a temporary passport by the you know, Kingdom of Great Britain, and basically claiming that she is a protected person by the by Britain. And that document was basically her permit to leave Zanzibar during the war, because there was a ship that used to transport all the British protected people all the way back to Yemen. And a document like this, I would have loved to know about, you know, last year when I was working on my film. But that's the thing, yani, it's very hard to put like an exit strategy for works like this, because you're always going to find something, you're always going to learn something. And it probably just boils down to like a personal decision that you have to make. But you know, in speaking to like my current situation, you know, from this project As If We Never Came, which I just showed, I moved on to expanding it into a film, whereby I really wanted to bring the story alive, you know, through my narration, through you know, the story itself. And we can we can put the film. So this is a 1-minute trailer, which I am actually showing for the second time. The last time I showed it was in October, and it was for a very like, I would say like a private audience. I'm kind of nervous about showing it again to a more local audience, but here we go, we'll start. Oh, I think, don't forget to mute. Yeah. Okay.
Marhaba Jaddo, it's me, Sheimah, the daughter of your son Saleh. We never met, but Baba still speaks of you to this day, almost 50 years after your death. I'm writing to you from the year 2020. You'd think the world would be in a far better place, but instead, we're all locked up in our homes because of an unfortunate pandemic. But I want you to know that I've been thinking about you and our journey as Yemenis in generational diaspora. I'm tired of feeling like a foreigner everywhere I go, of living in limbo, stuck in the past with the responsibility of a future. Old pictures and Baba stories are how I piece together how we got to where we are today, and it's through photography that I continue to write the rest of our story.
Unmuted, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of moved on to this format, which was a letter that I wrote to my grandfather in the peak of the pandemic. And so I was quite in my feelings at the time, being locked up in a house on my own. And, you know, this is just a 1-minute version of the full film, which inshallah I'll be releasing soon. It was a very, very exciting and daunting experience to work on something that I actually didn't have much experience in, but you know, it's I like, it's about taking the first step, and as I said, like having the right support system to help you through it. I'm quite excited about this phase of the project now, and yeah, ask away if you have any questions.
That film always it just really gets to me, because I think a lot of us have family that we've never met potentially, and I think this is what I mean about your work. It hits like it connects to everyone, even though people might not have been through the same movements or through the same experiences. They still find it extremely relatable. Like that image of the two men leaning against each other is so powerful as an image that it speaks to all
too many,
and it's kind of like an image that can also like speak for the work that you do, and that leaning and holds so much power within itself. I think something that I found interesting about what you said is like, especially with these type of like deeply researched work that you do, is that there's never a starting or end point. You could go on forever and continue collecting, and I think a lot of artists have tendencies where they just don't know when to stop. a project. So I'm just wondering, like, for yourself, when do you start a project and when do you end it? Like when are you like, okay, that's it, like this is when I have to stop working on this and leave it to the side, because it's not easy when you're doing this type of work to decide when it's ready.
Yeah, it isn't. And I think it just so happens that I've had to deal with deadlines on I wouldn't say both projects. So like As If We Never Came, there was a deadline for it and I needed to, tend to that, which was good because it essentially was my first sort of like long-term documentary photography project. And I needed the structure and the discipline. But in saying that, like when I talk about a deadline, like alhamdulillah, we had over 8 months to do it. And usually like these types of projects can take years. And so what I did was I knew that I wasn't finished with this project, but because of this deadline, I decided to turn it into like a phase 1 of like the overall story. And then phase 2 became this project, which was also part of my fellowship with the Magnum Foundation. And it was a very, very beautiful experience going through that, because like I didn't think that I would come out of this fellowship with a film per se. And it's like, it isn't to say that they encouraged me to make a film or dictated, what I would do. It's just that it was something that happened very, very naturally. And I would say I have the pandemic to thank, because, had it not been that, I don't know what this project would have been. It would probably have taken a very different format. But as they say, رب مرة نافعة. And in some ways, I guess this project, was quite therapeutic for me to work on as well. But now, inshallah, like after I release this film and hopefully take it to different festivals for it, to have its own life, the next phase is me wanting to experiment with augmented reality books and kind of moving it to like a more tangible / technological experience, and that's through the fund that you guys are generously providing through the project award. So like I don't really have a tip or a secret to specific departure points of projects. It's just that I have to understand what I'm being dealt with and then kind of make a decision on whether, I for sure know that this will continue as the next phase, or decide, what, khalas, enough is enough. And it's never enough.
Yeah, I think having deadlines is quite crucial when it comes to the creative work. Just having that, like knowing that there's an end point and that you need to work towards, and if it doesn't finish, you can make a part 2. I think that will work. And I love the titles of both of them, like they don't get too comfortable. It's something we can all understand with the what's happening. And I think I wanted to ask you one last question, and if anyone else also wants to ask a question, you can always type it in the chat, but I just wanted to ask about
they can do that.
Yeah,
yes, I do encourage questions.
So yeah, about your visual language and your practice and how it's growing. And I know that you're experimenting in these new mediums, but just where does photography sit in that? And are you seeing that all your work is going to start moving it more into film and augmented reality, or is it just an experimentation based on your current project that you're working with these new mediums?
I would say it's very experimentational. Yeah, that's a legitimate word. It truly is, because I didn't come from an artistic background. I didn't study art, I didn't study photography per se, other than like a couple of courses here and there, and they've been really, really instrumental in my journey thus far. And so part of me being experimental is that I want to push myself to start learning other mediums and start telling this particular story or any other story I would want to tell in the future, and sort of like bring it closer to people in a way that can make them feel what I'm trying to say, and sort of create impact in that sense. And so there was something you said, Aywa, and how like a lot of the images feel like you don't necessarily have to go through my pain or my past in order to understand it. And I think, like, especially with the topic of displacement and migration, like a lot of people can relate to it, if not because they've gone through it, but because they know other people that have gone through it. خاصة إحنا في الخليج, يعني we live with people of many different nationalities, and so we do kind of are exposed to that indirectly. And so I tried to get personal enough, but also make sure that whatever it is that is an output of my work becomes very much relatable to the person who doesn't even know much about what is going on. And like, I think through these experimentations, like that is what I hope to achieve, inshallah, with future projects. So like the next project, as I said, is going to be inshallah an augmented reality book, and that's something, it's a process that I'm going to be starting from scratch. So I'm doing the research of it now, and hopefully it will turn into something that is a lot more vivid and a lot more that can have easier access for people to reach, than a film, for example.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting to see. It's just, I was mentioned this earlier about a few of the projects in the submissions, as well as the awardees, have tapped into this idea of movement and migration.
I just got into the chat, and there's Reem saying that they couldn't see the presentation.
I fixed it from there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we have a question from Charlotte, which she would say, I want to know more about how the situation of the pandemic has shifted your project beyond the pragmatic shifts. Think about your family's history in new ways, or how you think viewership has shifted.
Okay, so yeah, that's a great question, because like as I was saying, it was, so my fellowship with Magnum Foundation was in a non-COVID time. Obviously, was meant to be me traveling to either Yemen or Kenya to continue the visual research of the project itself, and that didn't get to happen. And obviously, like, there was a lot of panic involved with, like, okay, what am I going to do now? I have a proposal that I made that like can't necessarily come to life because of all these different lockdowns and no travelings and whatnot. And so I think having gone through the depression of a pandemic at the same time, what ended up happening was me wanting to write a letter to my grandfather. And then organically, and by the way, like, I just have to preface that writing that letter was not an easy thing. It was really, really hard, like emotionally hard. But I continued anyway, and I thought to myself, okay, now that I have this like 4 or 5 page letter that I just blurted out of a moment of vulnerability, I know I can turn it into something, but I didn't want to like take images of a letter and just call it a project. I thought, okay, how about I record myself narrating it, and then from there I thought, I know I have a couple of archival images that goes with what I'm saying. What can I do now? So I started piecing a few things together, and I realized obviously that I had to obviously start taking new images. And everything you see in that 1 minute, and like even within the 9-minute film itself, it was all shot either at home or within like a 1 kilometer radius of the house, like the outside images. And so I really, like, it challenged me to think of different ways to bring a visual language together for the project. And, you know, even the letter itself, like, it kept not changing, but I kept having to tweak it every now and then to suit what I was trying to also say in terms of matching it with a photograph. And so it did. I think because of the pandemic, I ended up with a film and not like a still photography project, like As If We Never Came. And so in that sense, I, you know, can't really complain about the fact that I didn't get to travel to Kenya or to Yemen. It probably was for the best that I was able to dig even deeper into not just the archives, but try and find ways to like make images with my family. Yeah, I hope that answers Charlotte's question.
Yeah, no, I think that it did change a lot, but I think, like you said, to be forced to stay in kind of makes you it made you face things that you maybe had questions about or wanted to speak to, like writing a letter to your grandfather that you might have not done if you kept traveling and exploring things externally. I think that's very powerful. And it leads us to our next question, where Najwa is asking, you have a rich and deep connection to your focus and subject matter. Do you think a photographer can engage effectively on a subject that they don't connect to or can only connect to by proxy? So it's the opposite of what you do, which is like extremely connected to.
I think, I mean, again, like in answering this question, I'm not necessarily speaking out of personal experience, but like, you know, I do have my fellow photographer friends who do work on projects that have nothing to do with their personal lives. And, you know, like a lot of them have done a great job of it, because like we have to understand that in order for someone to perfectly portray an issue, you need to have access. And if you don't have this access, you're not going to be able to, you know, give the different facets of you know, what makes a problem a problem. And like initially what I wanted to do before I did As If We Never Came was to actually explore like my network of Yemeni friends and try and tell the story through their perspective. And, you know, I realized you know, as much as I have this issue in common with them, it's best if I start with mine first, because one, it has taught me so much about how to approach image making. You know, it really isn't a matter of like me meeting up with someone and then going like, okay, you pose like this and pose like that. And, you know, like you have to live with them. You have to, you know, they have to be open to like, you know, you being there in their face all the time. And so this is the kind of access that I'm talking about. It isn't like a permit to be in a specific place. And in saying that, like once you get this sort of openness and willingness from the next person to like allow you to take photographs, it becomes a collaboration between the two of you. You're no longer, you know, directing what you want to see. It's the other person, you know, being in the driver's seat and saying, okay, this is my story. This is what I want you to portray. This is how we're going to collaborate over making an image together. And, you know, it's, yeah, so it really all depends, Najwa. I don't know if you're a photographer, but I would love to hear from you on what you think is what you think answers your questions correctly as well.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because with actors or models, you can ask them to work with a certain concept. Whereas I know another person I had worked with in Tasweer, I'm not going to name them because they photographed their mother and they didn't really want people to know, but it was the hardest thing to convince a family member to photograph, and also that relationship. It's so interesting how it changes just by you photographing a family member, because you notice things that potentially you wouldn't even have noticed before, even though you've lived with them your whole life. And I think that that's such an iconic, like the family image is something that represents that of you hadn't even had a family image, and it sort of took this project to solidify your presence in this image that really looks like a lot of these archival images that I would find in the museum storage, for example. This quintessential family portrait that you find in especially like in the Middle East, in this area. Yeah, so Nedra says she's not a photographer, but you answered her question perfectly.
That's good.
I feel like a lot of people probably would be inspired to look into their family, and
that's honestly, like, that's what I really, really want to encourage as well, because it, like, Wallahi al-Azim, if it wasn't for these archives, like, I don't know if I'd even be with you today, I mean, it's not to say that I wouldn't be a photographer or continue, but I think that preserving archives is so important, and especially for me, like, because my parents lived a very different life, in a very different place, in a very different time, and so did their parents as well. Like, knowing where they come from and what their experiences were, like, is very pivotal and instrumental into, how you grow up as a person, and how you even want to grow further. It's really been very heavy to kind of understand the past that they've gone through, and so did many other people as well. So it's we're gonna get into like really heavy conversations that I'm trying to avoid, but it's because of these archival images that my father and my parents have been keeping that I'm a much better person today, I hope.
Yeah, I think it teaches you to be more grateful, by looking at what little they, people had, even like looking back at, my family archives, like people didn't have enough to eat, in my grandfather's time. So it's just, it really does humble you. And I think I'm hoping that, inshallah, we'll do in the future workshops about how to preserve family archives as well, because I think that's very important for people to understand that, and to then potentially, with you, do something about how do you put them together and connect these dots with the archives. I think it's great, and I encourage everyone to look into it as well.
It is quite a fun experience as well, because like, I remember last year when I was working on the film, I went back to Abu Dhabi for like 3 months after the summer, and like, my dad's a great storyteller, mashallah, and he, because like, he knows that I'm working on something, but he doesn't know exactly what it is. But obviously, like, I keep going to him with questions, and like, who is this person and who is that person, and sometimes like, we'll literally just have like our daily qahwa chit chats at night, and he will like, come, today I want to tell you about the day I escaped and like snuck back into East Africa. And so it'll be like this entire story that is so vivid, like, he remembers every single detail. And like, he doesn't know that in the back of my mind, like, I'm taking bits and bits of all of these details and like piecing them together. But yeah, I'm very excited for people to watch the film, because like, it's a much more immersive experience, obviously, than the 1 minute version that you saw today. So yeah.
Where would people be able to find your film once it's finished?
I'm still putting together a festival strategy. So I have started applying to different festivals, and like, yeah, I mean, like I still don't want to make any promises. Like I can't like say where it's going to be, but in due time, inshallah, we'll announce things. What? Okay, there's a question from Charlotte. What do you feel the creative possibilities are in moving into AR space in phase 3? I'm about to find out myself. Yeah, I'm about to find out myself, because like, as I said, it is going to be a new process for me, and I'm still like researching all these different elements of like how to create an AR book. But you know, what I do want people to take from this is to feel the story deeper, for them to be able to interact with like the book itself, and then also, you know, have this part of like an immersive technology that brings, you know, sound and image to life. So there's like not much detail that I can give because it's an exploratory phase.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll find out soon. I think with the process that we work with you on, how this will manifest and like how what we'll into. So I just want to, since we're hitting the 1 hour mark, say thank you, and inshallah, once the lockdown is over, people will be able to visit Murtaqa Gallery in Student Center in Qatar to see your work in real life, if anyone knows what that is anymore. And you know, we're hoping to have more conversations with you and for people to see more of your projects.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Sheimah.
Habibti, thank you. I'll see you soon, I guess, and we'll keep in touch.
Absolutely, for sure. Take care.
Bye-bye.